Hello. Recall that in previous lectures we considered the views of Mengzi and Xunzi concerning human nature and how we are to engage in the process of self-cultivation in order to become virtuous people. This lecture is going to compare their views in order to see where between them disagreement lies. Recall that Mengzi thinks that human nature is good, and what this means is that every human being has the potential to become good in virtue of having 4 moral sprouts, 4 innate dispositions to have certain feelings, such as compassion. Xunzi's view, by contrast, is that human nature is bad, and that we need to engage in deliberate effort to change our character in order to become good. Now, it seems that their views are diametrically opposed, but we'll see that there are actually deep agreements between the two philosophers. For example, in one passage, Mengzi says, quote, "It is the way of people that if they are full of food, have warm clothes, and live in comfort, but are without instruction, then they become close to being animals." End quote. The idea there is that without instruction, without ritual, without learning various matters, that we're no different from animals. But recall that in Xunzi's view, we need to have learning, we need to have ritual, we need to engage in deliberate effort in order to become good. And that the ability to engage in deliberation is something that's distinctively human. So Mengzi agrees, this ability to learn, to use our rational faculties, is what makes us distinctively human. So in other words, we see that the agreement between the two philosophers is that human nature becomes fully virtuous only through instruction of some sort, only through efforts of human beings of some sort. So this leads to the question, what exactly is the disagreement between the two? Really, they're kind of meaning something different by the concept human nature. So whereas Mengzi thinks that human nature is good because we have dispositions that give us the potential to become good. Now Xunzi wouldn't disagree with that. We do have the potential to become good for Xunzi as well. Xunzi's view is that human nature is bad because if we just acted on innate dispositions, on innate feelings, then we would do bad things. But for Xunzi, we have the potential to become good because we can change some of the bad dispositions. We can choose whether or not to act on certain dispositions. For both philosophers, we have some dispositions that are good, and Mengzi wants to really highlight the good dispositions that are innate. And Xunzi wants to highlight the bad dispositions that are innate. So it seems so far that maybe there's no disagreement between the two views. What matters here is the practical consequences of their two different views. So it's not merely a matter of emphasis on the good aspects or the bad aspects of human beings, but rather what we need to do to become better is different for the two different philosophers. We can think through their differences concerning the process of self-cultivation by considering their different metaphors for that process. Recall that Xunzi described the process of self-cultivation in terms of changing the shape of a piece of wood and changing it through using human artifice, through using human invention. So you steam and manually manipulate the wood in order to change its shape. What's crucial there is that the process is not organic, but rather results from human effort, human invention. And so what that would mean for self-cultivation is to use human inventions such as ritual to change one's nature for the better. Mengzi had a different view, and although he lived before Xunzi, he actually addressed the kind of view that Xunzi advocated for, and he rejects the view. So Mengzi at one point entertains the view that, quote, to make human nature benevolent and righteous is like making a willow tree into cups and bowls, end quote. So that's roughly Xunzi's view, that you take something organic and use human inventions to change it. But Mengzi rejects this view. He says that making the willow tree into cups and bowls would result in violating and robbing the willow tree. Doing something similar to human beings would, quote, lead them to regard benevolence and righteousness as misfortunes for them, end quote. Mengzi's point is that by not letting virtue grow organically, but rather by forcing it through ritual and training, people will be jaded. So imagine, someone that's a child is subject to rigorous training, punishment if they don't do things correctly, and so on. They're not going to really like doing virtuous actions for their own sake. And Mengzi's point is, such a person wouldn't really be virtuous. They might have a habit of doing virtuous actions because of the training, but they're not really one with their virtuous action. Now, of course, Xunzi could reply and say that this sort of training is really necessary, given our bad innate dispositions. But what we really need to do to work out their argument is to think through which of the two types of self-cultivation, which process of self-cultivation is the one that's going to be more successful. So we'll conclude by giving a characterization of the two different processes of self-cultivation. And I'm following here what the scholar Philip Ivanhoe has said about the two. So Ivanhoe says that Mengzi's view of self-cultivation is a developmental model. So you develop virtues naturally. They grow organically upon what you start with. Xunzi's view, by contrast, is what Ivanhoe describes as a reformation model. So you change the form of what you are. You don't grow organically, but you force things to change in a different way. And so virtues there are artificial, are human inventions. Now, both views are Confucian, and we can see this by thinking about a particular passage from the Analects, where it said that you need both study and reflection. And each of these two philosophers is emphasizing different aspects there. So at bottom, they're going to have to agree that you need both study and reflection, but the question is, which one is more important? Mengzi thinks that reflection is more important. You have what you need already, and you just need to reflect in order to figure out what is right, what is wrong. So you reflect on your intuitions, on those immediate reactions in cases such as the child about to fall in the well. Xunzi, by contrast, thinks that you need study. You need to learn what the sages said, not the intuitions that you have about your cases, but rather learn what others said. So in order to evaluate the disagreement between the two of them, what needs to be done is to figure out what the process of self-cultivation ideally should look like.